which is we are just recording. So this session is about our healthcare systems and really understanding how innovative diagnostics like blood tests can make their way into our systems for those who can benefit from that, in particular for early detection of cancer. And this session was brought by you by a consortium called GuideMRD, which is a consortium that looks at the potential use of blood tests for early detection of cancer. This was organized in collaboration with Lung Cancers Europe and Digestive Cancers Europe, together with the Patient Engagement Open Forum and the Synergist. So today we have a couple of objectives. This is one of our second session, and we want to understand really how can we move from an ideal pathway to really make that a reality for patients. And for that, we will share with you what we have learned about the blocking factors and facilitating factors to influence patient access to innovations in oncology care. We will also dive into the different roles that stakeholders can play, including yours, and then discuss what we can do collectively to ultimately make sure that those who can benefit from innovations can also reach patients in the standards of care. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Diedewij Vat. I'm working for the Synergist, and the Synergist is one of the partners in the GuideMRD consortium, and we are really focused on bringing stakeholders together to collectively drive change. And I'm pleased to be joined by our consortium partners in Daniel Smith from the University Medical Center in Hamburg, who will present the GuideMRD project to you, as well as Chiara Antonelli from Lung Cancers Europe, who will moderate an interesting panel discussion. And my colleague Isha, who will present today some of our early findings, what we have learned from healthcare systems. So I would love to also know who is in this room, because I can't see you, but I would love to for you to share in the chat perhaps where you're from and a bit of your background, so if you have an idea who is listening in today. And while you do that, I would like to share a couple of house rules for this meeting with you. So on the next slide, as you may have seen, our microphones are muted, but we very much encourage engagement. So please provide your questions, comments, and feedback in the chat. We will continuously monitor that, and we will make sure that we get to those in the session. The session will also be recorded, and the recordings and slides will be shared afterwards for broader use. And let's just make it an engaging session together. For those of you who wish to use translation tools, in the next slide, I will briefly show you. So there will be a link in the chat, and you can open Wordy, and that will allow you to set up another language if you would like to use that. If you struggle to open it or exit it, then please share it in the chat, and we will help you out. Next slide, please. For those new to the Patient Engagement Open Forum, we often call it PEOF, but PEOF stands for a multi-stakeholder community that is really connected for better health outcomes and to shape that with the patients and for patients. So we organize virtual and in-person events, and we are here also to dive into the events that we have organized as part of the GuideMRD work. So on the next slide, you can see a bit of our journey. So last year, we started looking into the role of guidelines and how guidelines can support adoption of innovations into cancer care and how patients can also play a role in shaping those guidelines and disseminating those. We have shared with you earlier an ideal care pathway and compared that with the current situation and had a webinar about pathways to help detect cancer early. And so today we're diving deeper into see what's blocking us from making this a reality for patients. So that said, we have an agenda for you in mind. We have like a presentation to start with to give you a bit of background, and then we have an interactive session where we would love to hear from you and exchange what do you see in your reality, in your country, in your context, and what can we work on collectively further to change systems where that's needed. I see that people are sharing in the chat where they're from, so continue doing that. But we also have a poll to start with to get a bit of sense of what is your entry point start joining this session. So can you please share with me how familiar you are with what makes it easy or hard for patients to get the tests that detect cancer early? So there is a poll and you can just choose. And a second question is there right away in terms of how familiar you are with mapping or understanding different parts of the healthcare system and how they work together and influence adoption of innovations. So if you could share your answers, I'll give you a moment for that. Answers are in, then I hope that we can see the results. So any results coming in?
I think we are almost done. If anyone is having troubles, just put it in. You can put your answer in the chat as well. But let me show that.
All right. So we see that we have mixed kind of familiarity with what it makes it easier or harder for patients to get the test to detect cancer, and that we see people that are somewhat familiar with system mapping. And I hope that by the end of this session, you're all very familiar with that and that it helps you also to drive change into your context. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Daniel Smith to briefly introduce the GuideMRD project to you to see what's about, and then we will dive deeper into those factors that make it easier and harder for patients to get access to these types of blood tests. Daniel, the floor is yours to introduce yourself and to explain the project.
Thank you very much, Ludwig. My name is Daniel Jan Smith. I am a research group leader and physician at the University Medical Center Hamburg-Eppendorf. And today I'm representing the coordinating unit of GuideMRD. I also saw that Luigi Ravagnan from BMS is also here. BMS is the co-leader on the project. And I'm happy to give you a quick intro to the GuideMRD project today. Next slide, please. The GuideMRD project is an IHI project which consists of academic partners as well as industry partners working together in a co-funded project by the European Union. GuideMRD started in May 2023 and is a 5-year project running until end of April 2028. And in GuideMRD, we really want to focus on blood tests using ctDNA in patients with lung cancer, pancreatic cancer, and colorectal cancer. Next slide, please. Overall, the overall goal of GuideMRD is to basically screen the entire landscape of existing ctDNA testing, also the reference materials. And first, we have started to analytically benchmark the existing ctDNA assays, and this milestone is now reached thanks to the work package leaders who overseen the work. In parallel, we have started 3 observational clinical studies for lung cancer, pancreatic cancer, and colon cancer to collect samples for the next step, the clinical validation of the top 3 performing tests. And of course, we don't want to stay in the research environment, but really want to bring ctDNA testing into clinical care. And this is where also this webinar today really plays an important role. Next slide, please. We have already shared some materials also in advance with you, but also with the general public. For example, at ASCO 2025, there was an abstract publication about the ideal healthcare pathway. So basically the pathway which includes ctDNA testing, which does not include today. And we also have already shared with you a dynamic system map where you will learn more about the different factors and stakeholders influencing the adoption of ctDNA testing. I hope you will enjoy the webinar, and I hand over to Isha.
Thank you, Daniel. So I'm very happy to share with you all the results of the work of the system map that you can see on the right hand of the slide. And here we collaborated with many of you who are present here today to shape our learning. So first of all, thank you to you all. To set the expectations on the scope of this effort, the research that we conducted focused specifically on the clinical adoption of innovative technologies in cancer care in Europe, such as blood tests that detect early signs of cancer recurrence post-surgery, which is called ctDNA MRD testing. There is a glossary in the chat for any of you who may be new to this term. And while the scope of this is specific, the system mapping approach and the key learnings may still inform other areas of healthcare as well. So to get started, on the next slide, please. To explore the complexity of adopting new innovations in healthcare, GuideMRD used a systems thinking approach. A quick introduction into systems thinking. As I saw, most of you are somewhat familiar with this approach. Systems thinking looks at how different parts of a system interact rather than examining each problem separately. In healthcare, for example, we often see the system through our own lens, whether as clinicians treating patients, policymakers managing health budgets, or researchers generating evidence, or industry developing new technologies. But systems thinking helps us to step back and to see the bigger picture of how stakeholders, rules, and incentives interact and where small changes can create meaningful impact. To bring this perspective to life, we developed a system map that visualizes the landscape, determining whether innovations reach patients. So instead of looking at isolated barriers, the map reveals how different parts of the system interact over time. To make it easier to navigate, this map includes 3 kinds of views. The first view is the ecosystem view, which shows the big picture of stakeholders and system connections. The second view is a helicopter view, which shows the key dynamics like clinical decisions or reimbursement. And finally, the street view shows what happens in practice and where targeted actions can actually create change. To build the system map, we followed a collaborative process with your help, as mentioned. So we began with stakeholder interviews where participants helped us uncover the key adoption challenges and the different perspectives that currently shape the system. These insights were then further explored in a multi-stakeholder workshop where we collectively mapped how different actors, incentives, and barriers interact across the system. And with the GuideMRD consortium, we then prioritized the barriers that are most likely to influence patient access and identified where GuideMRD could realistically contribute. And then finally, through a public consultation, you helped us validate and rank these barriers and potential solutions to ensure that the map eventually reflects a shared understanding across the community. So as you can see, we had over 160 stakeholders that participated and contributed to shaping our learnings. So time to get into the key results. Firstly, the analysis revealed 5 key dynamics that shape whether innovative diagnostics are adopted in practice. So first here we have clinical implementation. Here, findings suggest that clinicians need clear guidance on how to interpret results and to act on them in care. Second, we have the diagnostic infrastructure, where many health systems still lack the laboratory capacity needed to scale testing. Third, health outcomes. Here, more long-term and real-world evidence is needed to demonstrate patient benefit. Fourth is clinical validity and utility. Here, consistent validation is essential for regulatory and HTA decisions. And finally, commercial uptake. Uncertainty around reimbursement continues to slow down investment and wider scaling. Most importantly, we understood that these dynamics are interconnected, which means that progress in one area depends on progress in the others. Across this system, we identified 111 critical barriers that influence whether and critical drivers, whether innovation diagnostics are adopted in routine care. Here on the slide, you see the ones that stood out the most or that were prioritized by the stakeholder groups as the most important. One message here emerged very clearly, that uncertainty is slowing progress. Developers are often uncertain about what evidence will meet regulatory or HTA expectations. Regulators and HTA bodies struggle with data that is difficult to compare across studies. Payers face challenges in assessing the economic value to justify reimbursement. And even when the science is promising, clinicians may lack the guidance or confidence to use these tests in practice. At the same time, the system map also highlights important enabling factors like greater collaboration between stakeholders, a stronger clinical evidence, clear reference standards, and supportive policy frameworks can help reduce this uncertainty and accelerate adoption. In other words, the barriers we see are not isolated problems. They reflect system conditions that need to evolve altogether. Another key insight from the system map is that these factors reinforce each other. Evidence supports reimbursement. Reimbursement enables infrastructure investment, and infrastructure enables testing at scale. When real-world use generates further new evidence, this becomes a positive reinforcing cycle, and so adoption can be enabled. But as we can see, this unlocking this cycle requires more than technical evidence. It also requires a relational and cultural shift in healthcare. This means valuing early detection, multidisciplinary collaboration, and personalized care, where nurses, pathologists, oncologists, and patients work together in decision making. Supporting this relational shift will require stronger professional education, better communication across teams, and healthcare systems designed for collaboration. Ultimately, our learnings reflect a broader transformation in healthcare is needed, where we move from reacting to advanced disease towards earlier detection and more personalized care. In short, structural alignment enables adoption, but relational and cultural change sustains it. So, if both structural and cultural change are needed, the question is who needs to act? The system map shows that adoption requires coordination across the ecosystem. Clinicians, pathologists, nurses, and tumor boards translate diagnostics into care decisions. Developers generate technologies and evidence. Regulators, HTA bodies, and policymakers shape the rules and the access pathways. And patients will always remain central, ensuring that innovation responds to real-time needs. When these actors align, innovations can move faster from research into clinical routine care. The good news here is that several initiatives are already bringing stakeholders together to enable patient access to innovative cancer detection blood tests. One important example at the European level is GuideMRD. Rather than promoting a single test, this initiative is focusing on building the conditions for responsible adoption of innovative diagnostics across Europe. A key contribution is the development of reference standards for high-quality early detection testing, helping to ensure reliable and comparable testing across countries. Many of you helped identify its role through the public consultation and other workshops in evidence generation and scientific contribution, in generating data standards and interpretation guidance, in education and communication, in clinical value and utility demonstration, and finally, in helping to build consensus on strategies and recommendations for clinical adoption. In this way, GuideMRD aims to provide a blueprint for the future of personalized healthcare, preparing health systems for a new generation of diagnostic tools that can improve patient outcomes and make oncology care more efficient. So now we would like to invite all of you here present to contribute to this effort by sharing actionable ideas, participating in upcoming exchanges on key changes that will support adoption, and bringing these discussions into your national cancer strategies. You can use the policy awareness brief that will shortly be shared on chat to help raise awareness and to also learn more about the initiative. We are also very interested in hearing about other kinds of efforts and contributions in the field and where you see yourself playing a role in driving system change. We will explore this together very soon in the workshop later, but first we'll hear from experts in a panel discussion. So with that, I'm very pleased to invite Chiara Antonioni from Lung Cancer Europe to introduce and moderate the panel discussion now. So Chiara, over to you.
Thank you, Isha, and also Lidevai for this great introduction. And I have the pleasure to introduce you the panelists and that bring the voice and different perspective into the project. And we have Steve, that is a patient advocate from Digestive Cancer Europe and founder of Bowel Matter. And he brings the expertise in colorectal cancer and the patient involvement in research. Welcome, Steve. We have Alexandre Brutti, who is the treasurer of Lung Cancer Europe and also involved in patient and result, contributing expertise from a lung cancer survivor perspective and, of course, patient advocacy. We have, welcome, Alexander. And we have James, who is a board member of the FP3 program and who's an independent healthcare advisor, bringing a variety of expertise in diagnostic, pharma, biotech, and representing the industry and healthcare perspective. Welcome. And we have Bianca, who serves as medical expert at the Center for Innovation in Medicine, InnoMed, and contributes expertise in genomics, immuno-oncology, and also bringing the perspective from clinical and healthcare innovation, as well as policy perspective. Welcome, Bianca. And we have Katarina, who brings the perspective from cancer research and academic perspective because she's a researcher at the Institute of Human Genetics, Medical University of Graz, and she works in the field of molecular genetics, liquid biopsies, and colorectal cancer. Welcome, and I'm really happy to have this great discussion with you because I know the expertise you bring at the table. And also in the meantime, while we chat with the panelists, I would welcome the questions from the audience. So feel free to leave us questions in the chat. And as we see questions, we can also integrate your questions inside the panel so that we create really an interactive environment. And to start, I would like to maybe prompt the first question and open the floor with you, Steve, because from what we have seen from the map and based on your perspective, which is the aspect in the patient, from the patient perspective, that tends to be overlooked when decisions are made about the adoptions of new diagnostics?
Well, I get involved in quite a lot of these discussions, in my local region and with national policies and things. And the real thing from a patient perspective is that here's a technology which changes everything in terms of decision making. In my own case, I had stage 3C colon cancer, and when it came to decision on adjuvant chemotherapy, it was all based on statistics, whether to have it or not, and then how much to have and which to have, on statistics, not on actual evidence, because at that time I had the tumour removed and there was no evidence on CT scan or CA wasn't relevant. So and statistics are hard to understand for patients, and probability even less easy for patients to understand. Whereas here is a technology that can potentially say, yes, we can see the fingerprint of cancer in your body. That really makes a very different decision-making tool compared to previous methods, and it's much easier for a patient, particularly patients today who are bombarded with chemotherapy is worse than cancer, and all the things, don't do chemotherapy, do turkey tail mushrooms or something. So right at the heart of this is it comes down to actually providing something which patients can really use to make concrete decisions, probably the most important decision of their life. and I don't see that come up in the policy discussions and the funding discussions and things. They're all about, you know, what percent of this and all that kind of stuff. And I think you need to bring that into focus on every occasion when you're looking at this introduction.
Thank you, Steve. You brought up really an important point, because I think this is really what changes is decision making, in which the patient can really bring, you know, a word in the process and decide together. And I think this is what, you know, also when we did the patient, the pathway, the healthcare pathway, is where I think the guide MRD and also liquid biopsy can change it. And in your perspective, coming back in that time, you know, in how would have helped you, you know, like, so at which stage would have helped you, and should maybe to avoid overtreatment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for instance, if I was a stage 2, you're taking it on sort of some kind of belief as to whether you don't need it, chemotherapy or not. So that's really, you know, a leap of faith to say I'm not going to have chemotherapy. I live with the benefits of 12 cycles of FOLFOX, and there was a point halfway through when they said, here's new research that says 6 cycles is as good as 12 cycles for 55% of the people. You know, am I the in the 43% that doesn't is always going to recur, or am I in the 2% that might benefit, that, you know, over the ones who had already survived from the 6 cycles? So it would have made that decision an objective decision, not an entirely up in the air sort of well, I've got to give it everything I've got kind of a decision. And so, you know, who knows how much less impact the chemotherapy would have had. It would have made a huge difference to me. Yeah.
Thanks, Steve, for bringing that up. Really important, and thanks for sharing. I will, like, I don't know, I don't see Alexandre into the panelists. So I was wondering if you had something different, but maybe it's not there. So I will maybe move to another perspective, and maybe Alex, if you are there, you can chime in at a later stage. Because my question now relates more to, you know, like the moving into another perspective that is Bianca's one, representing the clinical healthcare and policy perspective, is like, which factors are frequently misunderstood by stakeholders when it comes to adoptions of innovative diagnostics?
Thank you, Chiara, and good afternoon, everyone. One important thing when discussing the adoption of innovative diagnostics or any other technological innovations, I think, is that they do not enter ideal systems. They enter real health systems with existing constraints, different incentives, and already established inequalities. And these realities strongly influence actually whether an innovation translates into better patient care. And from the perspective of the healthcare professional, this becomes visible first at the level of clinical integration. A new diagnostic innovation only becomes useful when it fits into the realities of clinical decision making. We need to know how a test is used, how the results should be interpreted, how they affect treatment decisions. There are also very practical constraints: time pressure, lack of incentives of time to discuss results with patients, uncertainty, and a lack of institutional pathways. So when clinicians are not confident about how a result will influence patient management, they will simply not adopt it. An aspect that is often underestimated is that different stakeholders define value differently. And clinicians will focus on whether a diagnostic enables earlier intervention or better treatment planning or any other outcomes, but payers will focus on the cost effectiveness and sustainability. Industry will focus on the technical performance, innovation potential, and so on. And all these perspectives are actually legitimate, but when they are not aligned, implementation becomes really difficult. And this shows that the adoption is not only a problem, scientific question, but is also a coordination challenge between different actors in the systems, which is what the work in GuideMRD has shown. And there are frameworks. If we zoom out and look at the European frameworks, for example, the European Cancer Control Plan, initiatives linked to the EU Cancer Mission, which can really bring together at the same table clinicians, policymakers, researchers, industry, patient organizations around shared priority, and this can ensure access to innovation. However, the challenge is to actually translate these European ambitions into very different countries' national health systems, which vary different in infrastructure, financing mechanisms, or system readiness. And across all of these dimensions, I think inequalities within the healthcare systems remain an important underlying challenge. Innovative diagnostics often appear first in very well-resourced centers with strong infrastructure expertise, while patients in smaller hospitals or regions with fewer resources may have less access. So if this is not addressed intentionally through health system planning and policy design, innovations can only widen disparities, unfortunately. And we have seen this here. I come from Romania and Eastern Europe. We have seen that many, many times innovations actually widen inequalities already there. And what's important is that inequalities are not only structural, they also relate to literacy, to cultural factors, and trust in the healthcare system. In Romania, for example, we have studied how cancer literacy and trust in the healthcare system influences whether people actually benefit from innovations. We identified very high levels of fatalistic beliefs around cancer, despite the availability of solution, biomarker testing, for example, and other kinds of drugs available in the healthcare system. And this contributes to this fatalistic attitude, which dates back in many cultural factors, and more even political. They contribute to very low participation in screening programs, for example. So this is why it's important to look at the system as a whole and zoom out, as we previously mentioned. So yeah, I think ultimately it's about how stakeholders align around value, how policy frameworks are translated into national context, shaped by specific factors, which those are that really need to be understood.
Thank you, Branka. I think with your intervention, you overcome a lot of the issues, but I think you also brought up some solutions. And maybe the take-home message that I have is that an alignment is needed, and also a discussion from different stakeholders, and also bring these challenges at the higher level. So at the European level, at the policy level, so that everyone can contribute it. And thanks also for sharing the situation in your country, because I think you are also right. It's not just about one system. Then we need to find also solutions at the national level. And for that, what's the best way of doing it? Because of course, Europe is putting, let's say, the umbrella, but then how we can make this changing happening also at the national level? What's an advice or your point of view?
We have to see what actually works, because in Romania, for example, we have many implementation challenges if we're discussing about the National Cancer Control Plan. And in many instances, we have seen how many bottom-up approaches actually work, coming from the civil society, from patient organizations, from organization driving research, which can bring together all the stakeholders at the same table, as we are trying to do here with our work around the pentahelix stakeholders. And we are involved in actually implementing the ECOS project. And we see how challenging it is to bring everyone at the same table, especially with, I don't know, changing ministries and changing political priorities. It's very important to keep a subject such as cancer innovations high on the agenda.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for sharing, Bianca. And of course, if you, like the panelists or the audience has questions or, just comments, we are also happy to hear your perspective, so feel free. And related, like if we go into your perspective, James, so more about tech, pharma, and diagnostics, which aspect of the system do you believe is the one that is receiving the least of attentions despite having the major influence on the progress?
For me, the most important aspect here is our quality and performance standards, particularly for lab tests. So lab tests occupy this really interesting, evolving or gray area between highly regulated products like drugs and not very regulated products like food, for example. And lab tests are not really like apples at the marketplace, where you can get a reasonable sense of the quality just by looking at it or inspecting it. If you see them on sale, you can turn it over and see if there's a spot on it and assess whether or not it's worth that lower price for you to accept the product with the lower quality. Sometimes you can mitigate that yourself. But for tests, it's really complex because even after you decide on the apple and bite into it, take the test, you're not sure that you necessarily get reliable results. And that's because that all the tests are not really the same. We sort of operate under the assumption that most tests are at least comparable if they're called the same thing or if they use a similar technology, but it's really not the case. And looking at the other side of the spectrum, you can look at pharmaceutical products, for example, and recognize that a consumer can't tell by looking at the pill whether there's even any active ingredient in it at all, or whether that active ingredient is likely to work for you. It could be a pill that you buy at the pharmacy or a capsule of turkey tail mushroom extract, or whatever. And this is why developed societies put in place a strong regulator to protect consumers, because there's no way for a consumer to be able to tell the quality of the medicine or even the test in this case without really having quite a lot of expertise. And that's the regulator's role then to look at that. When I was chief medical officer at Roche Diagnostics, I was part of the industry effort to promote new regulation called IVDR, the IVD regulation, which was an advance over the previous generation of regulation for tests called the IVD directive, which allowed every company to self-certify that their products were great. And that was a very convenient system. It brought a lot of innovation, a lot of new kinds of tests, but not a lot of reliability. And we knew this as Roche because we would invest a lot of money into a new technology, a new test. We would launch it, and literally the next day, 10 other companies would start selling a test that they called the same thing. And I guarantee you that none of those other companies had done the kind of clinical trials that we had done. And so this then presented a problem for patients. They could look at these tests. They probably saw that they were cheaper and may have chosen one of the cheaper tests, but there was no way for them to tell whether it's a good enough quality. So we argued in Europe for this higher level of regulatory standard, which requires test manufacturers, especially if they're delivering what we call high-risk tests, like in cancer, for example, to make these crucial decisions that Stephen was talking about, that they have to go through a regulator, just like a pharma company would have to go through a regulator to prove that they have evidence that the test is quality, it's reliable, it's going to deliver the results that you're looking for. In places where regulation is not strong, like in the US, for example, US FDA doesn't really regulate lab-developed tests as much as I think they should. Industry and stakeholders can coordinate efforts to run comparative studies to generate some of the evidence about the performance of different providers of these tests. This is exactly what we did at Foundation Medicine when we were launching a new type of biomarker called tumor mutational burden, which can predict response to immune checkpoint inhibitors, for example. there wasn't a strong regulator in place around that. So we worked with several other industry partners to publish the performance results of our version of TMB and to allow other partners to compare their versions of that. And what that did is it allowed for a benchmark of quality. It allowed for a certain understanding of what does quality mean. And it highlighted for some of those other partners who were not performing as well what they needed to improve in order to get up to that standard. So even if you don't have a strong regulator in place, you can actually coordinate stakeholders and good actors in the marketplace to generate some of this evidence.
Thank you, James. I think it needs just a session, I think, on all your insights, because this is amazing and you're bringing up a lot of prospective regulations as seen not a barrier, but something needed to protect patients. And sometimes it's not always the case, in people's mind, because of course, we want things to be accessible, and sometimes we have blockers, but you brought a really good perspective. Unfortunately, due to the time, I will move to the next question, but your perspective, as all the others, were just great. I ask you, Katerina, what about which part of the system are often over or under emphasized when discussing innovative diagnosis? For example, not used in practice, or what's your perspective there?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So just to explain a bit, my perspective on this is really mostly coming from the GuideMD project that I've been working on for 2.5 years now. And so as part of this, we were mostly responsible for analytical benchmarking. So that means to compare different assays that use circulating tumor DNA to detect minimal residual disease. And as a part of this initiative, of course, we were in contact with a lot of different assay providers on the market. And something we really see a lot, which gets a lot of attention, and this is also something that James already mentioned, is of course the performance of these assays. Assay providers really strive to have the highest sensitivity, the lowest error rate, so that these assays are really reliable. And it's like I said, a very competitive market. But what is still lagging behind a bit is that there is the evidence for clinical validity, so that there is really a clinical benefit when you use these ctDNA diagnostics to guide patient treatments, that there is improved outcome. So this is still lagging behind. Something I can say also from our benchmarking is we also there see these improvements in the performance. We see that some of these assays using reference material really show very impressive performances. But the thing is also, you have to be aware of that before we started with the GuideMD project, a comparison like this was not really available. It was not really able to compare these different assays because there was no reference material there on the market. And this is something also you have, in order to be able to trust these assays and to know that they are reliable, you have to be able to have a standardized reference that you can use to test them. And this is something that we try to do with GuideMD. And I think another thing that when it comes to the clinical implementation of these assays that is a bit overlooked still or not talked about so much is the availability of the assays. So most of the assays that also participated in GuideMD, the assay providers are located in the US, and the assays are not yet available in Europe. And this is also something that came up already. The reason is because in Europe, it's much harder with the IVDR regulation than in the US. And the companies do show a lot of initiative, and there is willingness to also set up labs, centralized laboratories in Europe. But of course, it takes time, and we're not there yet. And also, this is something that Bianca mentioned before. What we can say, there's still a lot of open questions, for example, regarding reimbursement of these assays. And the regulations are different in different countries in Europe. So there is still a lot of open, very practical questions that have to be addressed. And also, I'm not a clinician, but when a clinician uses a test like this, he needs to have guidelines to know for which patients do these tests really make sense. or where is it maybe not useful? So there need to be more defined guidelines before we're really able to use these assays, I think.
Yeah, thanks. This is another hot topic that is about performance, but like you also brought together a really depth into this discussion. I mean, bringing different stakeholders into play, because I think this is the difference that we can make also with this project. And thanks also for specifying about the benchmarking, because this is something that this project is doing, really to do this first step that is very important to then, compare the tests as well. I know that I'm running over time here, so I just would like also Alex to bring his perspective. And Alex, from your perspective, as a patient advocate, what do you think is overlooked when decisions are made about diagnostics? And if I can ask you to be brief in your
I will.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, but this is fine. So thanks for giving me the floor. I was at the end. I was so planned to be just after Stefan, but it was nice to have all the people talking before me, because I can also liaise what I was proposing. Yes, myself, I'm was really interested by Guide MRD, the project adventure. I took part of this project because of the nature of the project itself. Because for me, it's a revolutionary diagnostic tool, because it's not invasive at all, and this was from the beginning my point of adherence to this project. And the context of the study was dealing with bad prognosis cancers, that's pancreatic, lung cancer, and colorectal one. And this, you can measure the determination of all the project stakeholders. So you have to know that any patient is stressed by the relapse. So a tool which addresses this topic is more than welcome. And I think that Guide MRD is providing this. And we have, for sure, as it is a new tool. When we bring a new idea to the market, this creates mixed feeling. So we know that. So in other field than else, we say the devil, better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. Now, this is what we say in the culture. But this is also resistant to change. We are not replacing any other, with ctDNA. We are not replacing other detection. We are complementing them, and we are bringing a molecular non-invasive test to the world, which is really for me revolutionary. I'm really so convinced of that. Just to let you know that we have a stage 4. When you have at the beginning, the Guide MRD was not targeting stage 4 people, but myself, I'm a stage 4 lung cancer survivor, and for example, my initial tumor, which was a big one, completely shrunk. So I don't have any. We don't have any visibility of the tumor when I'm doing the periodic check with a CT. With a CTAP or MRI or whatever. So I don't see any nodules. But as I'm stage 4, I'm quite sure that some metastasis is somewhere. So I think this ctDNA test will be really important to have for everyone who has resect surgery or who has no primitive tumor anymore. So this said, the tool is addressing this kind of relapse. So this is really interesting. And for sure, we have to see that it's not. I know that you are so chasing me for the time,
Yes,
but
exactly.
the
Because
thing is,
I know,
yes,
because I know your perspective. That's why maybe, you know, I speed up a little bit,
yeah.
but it's a
Okay,
pity for the rest of the audience to, you
okay,
know, if
but
I shorten. But you brought up also another great point that is about, you know, the test that is simpler to make and maybe helps to reduce the fear of, you know, like the unknown and waiting time that can be really long. So thanks for bringing this perspective and many other points. Just for a matter of time, I hand over to Isha to explain to us which will be the next phase, but also in the moderation groups, we can have additional questions. So bring your questions and each of us will be there. So Alex, you can also continue during your moderation group. Thank you all for your
thank you.
perspective, and I hand over back to you, Isha.
Thank you, Chiara, and thank you to all the panelists for such a rich discussion and adding your insights, and also to the audience who've been adding their questions and thoughts into the chat. Thank you so much. Now we'd like to hear more from you and have a bit of an interactive workshop. Take some time to hear how these insights that you've heard through the presentation and the panel discussion, how they resonate with you, how they sit within your context, and where you see the greatest opportunities and your role in enabling change for better patient access across the system. So we will now go into 4 breakout room discussions. For each room, you will have one of the panelists who will support. You are also welcome to ask them questions. And you will be directed in a random order to these rooms. We request that you keep your camera on if you can. For this discussion, we will be using a specific tool called Group Map. We will share the link with you in the chat when you are in the breakout space, and the synergist support in the room will support in taking notes if you have any technical issues, and you're also welcome to contribute on chat. So with that, I would like to call out to Matt to help us go into our breakout rooms.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had an enriched discussion, a bit more insights into local context and reality of all of you on the ground. We have a quick kind of wrap up before we close this session. So I just wanted to check with the groups if there is anything key that stood out to you that you want to bring to the plenary group. So is there any group who would like to start, or anyone that wants to share a key insight?
I can maybe start with the highlights from my group. We wrap up perspectives from the patient point of view and the industry point of view mainly. And what we agreed on is the fact that one of the key steps is evidence generation. And the evidence generation is key to demonstrate value and also to push for a change behavior and a change management, also in the clinicians, because if the clinicians don't see the value of these diagnostics, they are not willing to use them. But of course, we need to contextualize also this small portion of the map in thinking that, you know, there are also incentives needed, return on investments that are very important to push this happen. And another point that was brought up was the fact that sometimes, like often, let's say, we lack the patient-reported outcomes. And these patient-reported outcomes can really elevate the evidence generation because they bring the real-world evidence. And we said that sometimes they are undervalued, and this is something we should do more. And of course, another key point is also around eligibility criteria, accessibility, because these can be key barriers if we don't take care of them in advance and act on them.
Thank you, Chiara. That very much aligns, I think, the discussion we had in our group. So I hear the need for evidence and studies that are working on it, but also thinking about patient-reported, patient experience kind of evidence that can drive this further. And then in our group, we also heard the link, especially with guidelines. So that to be able to get access to this, we need it incorporated in national or European guidelines, as I think one of our participants was sharing. Otherwise, you can ask for it as a patient, but doctors may not be willing to provide. So that was a bit from our group. Is there any other group that wants to share a key highlight or perspective?
Yes, so maybe I can go next. So we had the different perspectives from patient representatives, from regulatory perspectives. Some areas that need to be prioritized were identified on communication around uncertainty and acting on the complex data from early detection testing, understanding how it can influence clinical management further. Also, another important topic is on the training of healthcare professionals. They have been trained on the new treatment opportunities and providing with patients with the best solutions and opportunities. Also, some discussions were focused on ways to make MRD assays more available. Although the centralized ones have the best performance, more in-house testing should be available to make the distribution broader and more effective. Also, there were mentioned some examples of best practices, such as initiatives for access to testing, Genomics England, on giving patient access to research and clinical trials.
Thanks for sharing. Rich discussions. I see we're coming towards the end of this session. So all the group map input, feel free to continue adding your ideas. We will all collect them and make sense of them, feed them back to you, and then integrate them in our next steps, because our next kind of work is to see how we can get from challenges to really integration and making the best out of the opportunities to make sure that ultimately when the evidence is there, the tests can reach the patients who can benefit from it. So there's more work to do, but we are on a collective journey to get towards this. So just to end, I just want to check in with you how familiar you are now with the kind of barriers that exist and also with ways you can understand the different parts of the system. And would love to see also your rating and if you like this session and want to share it with someone else, or how likely you will be to share it with a friend or colleague. So please share your feedback with us, because that helps us to see how we can further improve these educational webinars. And you may also share any feedback you may have in the chat or with us as organizers. Do we get responses to the poll? It's always interesting because I can't see them, but I think they will come your way.
It's coming in slowly. I'll let it maybe open for a few more seconds. And then if anyone has technical difficulties doing that, feel free to put it in the chat as well.
Perfect. In the meantime, before we see the results, I want to just help you to see how you can stay engaged with this community. So I encourage you to continue checking out the system map that we have shared with you. It's not set in stone. It will evolve over time, and to support us further in the co-creation of change based on the insights we have gathered today. We have a next educational kind of webinar coming up in April, which is more around the regulatory challenges, as we have also discussed in this session, but specifically also hearing from regulatory people and opportunities to address those challenges. And if there's anything else that you're interested in terms of resources, awareness activities that you would like to see from the Guide MRD project, then I encourage you to share those as well in the chat. So stay tuned. If you want to learn more and follow us, there is a group that you can follow on Precision Synapse to stay engaged between the events. There's also a LinkedIn page that you can follow, and GuideMRD has also a newsletter if you want to stay up to date about the latest research results as well as the next events. I encourage you to sign up for that as well. Lastly, I'd like to thank all the panelists for their rich discussion and the speakers, as well as the co-organizers, especially Chiara and Anna from Lucia and Digestive Cancers Europe. Thank you so much for organizing this with us and for all the speakers and panelists to join this session, as well as everyone who contributed. I hope it was an interesting session. We still have the cliffhanger from the poll. And the last slide that I have for you is for the other patient open forum sessions. So if you want to join any of these next sessions, there are other sessions that are of different topics, but you're always welcome to join those as well. So thanks a lot, everyone. And I hope we can get the poll results towards the end to close this loop. Yes, wow. Nice results. I see you have learned something today. You're more familiar and you're happy to share this further. If you have any further feedback for us, don't hesitate to share that with us. We are always looking for ways we can improve these kind of sessions. So thanks a lot, everyone, and have a nice rest of your day or evening.